Welcome to part 2 of the Home for Thanksgiving album. Today we're going to start with our first page, which is the storm door or the cover. And all I want to do is run my craft knife around all the window indentations on the die cut. I've already done this for you to save some video time, but it's pretty simple. If you have a very sharp craft knife, and of course be super careful with this, just run your knife around the edges. And these indentations are pretty deep on this AccuCut die, so I don't think you'll have any problems. If you're uncomfortable with the craft knife by itself and you don't think you can stay within those lines, just take a ruler. I have a metal edge Tim Holtz ruler, and I just put the metal edge here and run it along the edge. So that's a little tip for you if you want to protect yourself from slipping off and making an inaccurate cut. And then you just pop them out. I'm going to save these pieces for one of the other pages in the album, so I'm going to set those aside for right now. And what I want to do is cover the front of this door with a piece of pattern paper. I've chosen to use the quiche, kind of a simple cover. There's not a lot of pattern paper area going to show on this. I'm going to put an acrylic under here so it looks like a door. So I wanted more of a simple pattern, something very subtle. There's a couple of ways that you can put pattern paper on chipboard albums. You can adhere the whole paper over the top, flip it over, and then run your craft knife around the edges. But a lot of people aren't real comfortable with using the craft knife, so what I've decided to do for the demonstration today is I'm just going to trace around. I've already started by lining up. I take advantage, if I can, of any of the straight edges that you can on your pattern paper. So just line this up along the edge, trace around. I'm going to continue to trace around all the openings. You could also at this point just trace around here, cut it out, glue it on, and then additionally use your craft knife in here if you're more comfortable that way instead of using it completely. But what you do is just trace around, holding it nice and still. I also do the holes for the binding rings on the side, and you have a nice image to cut out. Then all you're going to do is just take your scissors and start cutting. So I'll be back in a few minutes and we'll continue on with the project. Alright, as you can see, I've finished cutting out that paper, and if you have any pencil lines showing, just lightly erase them. I'm going to be inking around this edge once I adhere it to the chipboard, so it won't be that big of a problem. You can punch these out now, which I will do, but you can always punch them out afterwards too. But I'll just use my crocodile, punch out the holes here. And then we're going to size it and make sure. Looks pretty good. Now what I'm going to do, you can either go around and smooth out some of these slightly rough edges, or you can do it once it's all done. I'm going to adhere it on, and then we'll smooth it out at the end. I'm going to use Club Scraps bookbinding glue. I like this because it doesn't dry quickly, so it gives me time to move the paper around a little bit. And then I just use a paintbrush and kind of smooth it out. You don't need a lot of this glue. It lasts a long time. But you can also use ATG on this if you're real good at lining them up. Once you stick it down though with ATG, you're pretty well set. So that and score tape, I like to use the liquid instead of that and the score tape. Just because I'm not perfect at lining them up, I want to give myself an option. So put a reasonable amount on, but we're going to smear it a little bit here and there to smooth it out. For these type of albums, it's going to get a lot of people browsing through your albums. So you want to get those edges really full of glue. And sometimes with tape, you don't get that edge as nice as it should be. Because this is the first place that any paper is going to come up from the edge and start to tear. So continue on getting all of this nice and covered. You can always go back and add more if you think you need it. And then take your pattern paper. This is where, as you can see, I can kind of move it around a little bit. And that's what I like about the liquid glue. I can never get it on perfect the first time. I like to be able to move it around a little bit. So press it down, and then I take a brayer and just rub it over the top so I get a really good adhesion from the paper, with the paper and the chipboard. Go over it quite a few times. If you don't have a brayer, you certainly can use your hands and just rub very hard. You can use your bone folder. But there you go. Now what I'm going to do is take a file. You can use, this happens to be a Stampin' Up! File kit, but you can use even regular nail files and just kind of go over it. If there's any corners that are bothering you, you can also turn this over if you have any paper that's sticking out, if you didn't make a perfect cut. And like down here, there's a little bit of paper sticking out. What I can do is go back with my craft knife and just go along these edges and trim out that little piece that's showing. You want to make them as perfect as you can. I'm trying to make it look like a real front door, so take your time. It's fun to just make it look the way you want it. So if it takes a while, it's worth the effort. So I'll come back in a few minutes. I'm going to finish trimming out some of these. There's a couple edges over here that I'm going to do, and then file it nice and smooth, and we'll come back and we'll ink up the edges. You can tell that I've sanded this all down, made it all smooth, and you can leave it this way if you choose. I'm going to use the Wild Honey Distress Ink and a blending tool, and I just want to lightly go around the edges of the door. I don't want it to be real distressed, but I do want to basically recolor over that white core of the paper. And it also gives it a nice highlight on the edge. I'm going to do the outside and the inside. Hopefully you can see some of the highlights showing now. I'm putting it just lightly on the inside edges. Continue on with the rest of the edges that are showing and I will be back. Alright, I finished doing the distressing on the edges with the wild honey. And to save a little video time, I flipped it over and I added some of the score tape, 1/4 inch score tape. And how I did it, I'm just doing a couple rows. This is going to adhere our acrylic down so that it's going to simulate the glass in the storm door. So all I did was just run a couple strips. On the whole area. This isn't going to show because we're going to also afterwards cover up this side exactly the same way we did on the front with patterned paper. So really it's just an in-between little sandwich here. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make sure this is all secured down nice and tight. Start removing all of the tape backing. I start at the bottom and work my way up. I don't remove it all at once. I want to get the acrylic to start adhering at the bottom. Now I'm going to turn it sideways here. I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. So I peel it back just a little bit and bend it back. Basically going to start my acrylic from here and work my way up. So I'm only going to remove the backing up to this point. Because once you stick anything to this score tape or sticky strip, if you're using something from Stampin' Up, any double-sided tape, it's pretty difficult to remove without damaging what you're trying to put on there. Okay, so we've got the tape removed from here, and I take my acrylic. Of course, hopefully I'm not going to blind you with this. There are 2 holes here. Make sure you get your holes on the correct side. You want to line it up over here. And start down here, lining it up. And definitely lining it up on the sides. This is trimmable, so if you are off a little bit, it's going to be fine. And press down. And so that I don't blind you, I'm going to fast forward here and continue to remove these strips off and get the rest of it done, and I'll be back and show you what that looks like. Alright, I finished the acrylic on this side. So we've got the simulated glass on the front. And then what I'm going to go do next is I'm going to do the same thing as I did here. Try to hold this up so you don't get such glare. Same thing as I did on the front with patterned paper, and I've chosen the pecan pattern for the back. I'm going to trace around, cut out again, and adhere that onto the back of this storm door, and we'll start decorating the front. Alright, I've completed cutting out that other piece of patterned paper, and I have found the best way when you're working just with patterned paper before it's mounted onto your chipboard, if you take your sanding block or any of your files and sand it this way and lightly hold it and do it this way, you won't tear your paper. So I sanded everything, and then I also inked the same way. And what I like about this is it has a little bit of a worn look, but it's not anything that's too distressed. So ink around this way, which is what I did, and I tend to go out from the inside and pull out and re-ink and re-ink. And then what I have done now is repeated the same process for the back side of the storm door with my double stick tape or score tape. Same process, pull the parts back, and I'm going to adhere this going forward from the bottom up to the top. I also want to punch the holes in. Again, it's the same situation. You can punch them afterwards, but I do like to punch them first. So we'll go through and punch those holes again. That also helps me make sure I have the door on the right side when I'm mounting that piece of paper. And then I'm going to line it up. On top of my acrylic, centering again as we did on the front. There's a slight room for error on the sides. You can always trim, but you want to try to get that vertical line as straight as possible. Press down, and then continue on going all the way up. I peel my strips back a little at a time. And continue pressing down, checking the alignment on the sides. Press firmly and move your way up, and then I'll show you how to do the eyelets on the side edges in the next step. Alright, so here's the front and the back with the pattern paper attached. I'm going to set this aside just for a minute because I want to add basically you've seen those brass little kick plates on the bottom of storm doors, so we're going to make a faux brass kick plate. So I've cut a piece of chipboard, and this is more of a medium weight. The door chipboard albums that I sell on my Etsy shop are the heavyweight. This is a very bendable, lightweight piece of chipboard, and I cut it at a 1/2 inch by 5 1/2. And I'm going to take some of the gathered twigs distress ink, and I want to just distress the edges somewhat. It doesn't have to be real dark, but I want to change the color of the basic chipboard craft color to more of a brown, and I don't want it to be even. I want it to be spotty. You can twist the blending tool if you're using a blending tool. Definitely the edges I want darker. You put the color around the edges in a darker color than you do the center, and you'll get the dimension that you're looking for on most of your projects. It makes it look like they come alive, and that's really why I make chipboard albums. I want them to look as realistic as possible if I'm trying to do something that is in the real world. Okay, that's good enough for that. And then what I'm going to use, I think I'm going to use a sunflower sparkle. Don't want it to stand out too much from the front color of the album. So I just am taking Perfect Pearls Mist and Sunflower Sparkle, shake it up and roll it so that you get the mixing ball. Oh, I also want to do this. I think it's a little large, but I'm going to do it anyway. It comes with the album. It's like a doorknob. I think I'm not just going to spritz this. I may not use it, but if I'm doing the same process, I might as well do them at the same time. So we'll do this little circle. It may look okay. Alright, and then I'm just going to spritz this and let that dry. It'll pool up nice. I don't want to put too much, just enough to give it the impression that I'm going for. So let me move this aside to dry. And we'll put the eyelets on. I'm going to use the antique brass jumbo eyelets from Stampin Up and my crocodile. And I'm pretty sure I have to adjust this to the largest setting here. You just push them in, and you'll see there is a little bit that needs to be adjusted on this side because our chipboard is pretty thick. So I just take my bold folder and push around that pattern paper. Make sure it has a nice fit. My crocodile in. And Adhering. And it has a real nice effect on this side, even though I don't have a backing piece. These are nice and durable, so I like to use the ones from Stampin' Up. You may have a different choice out there. If you have a good idea, let me know. These work really well for me on any of the albums that I've made. Again, do the second one. Crimp it down, and we're set. Now I have a little piece of the cardstock that complemented the color on this pattern paper that I mentioned in my first video. It's Summer Star Fruit. Let me see if I can just set this up here. I don't want to, it's hard to work with acrylic. I don't want to get too much glare for you. I'm going to just take a little, it's a very thin piece. What it is going to be is like a simulated hanger. On our next video I'm going to do the wreath that goes on the door. So I want to adhere this about right here. And let me measure this for you. See how long this is. It's kind of a scrap, so 2 3/4, and this is really like a 1/16 of an inch wide. So a 1/16 of an inch by 2 3/4. And I'm going to take just some quick dry adhesive and run a line along the center here. Don't want to go down too far. Don't need a lot. Got to move them up just a little. I'm going for a monotone look on any of the major pieces that I want to be kind of subtle in the background. I want my wreath to be my focal point, but I am, and you might get some glare here, so I apologize. I'm going to have to lay this down flat, because I have a little, this is the glaze pen. I think they're Jelly Roll glaze pens, and I want to just, it'll dry satin, so I want to just put a little bit of color across the top. Hopefully my head is not in the frame. I apologize if it is. It'll make a satiny look, but it won't be too shiny like a gloss would be. So I'm going to let that dry. And I think this is a good place to end. I will, once my brass plate is dry that we made, I'll put that on the next video, and we'll assemble our wreath. So I hope you will come on back to see part 3, where we're going to do the full completion of the wreath, and I'm going to use the 4 Seasons stamp for the wreath on the front of the door, and then we'll move on to some other options. Thank you so much for stopping by.